Okay, well, prynawn da, good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege to welcome you all this afternoon to May's Inspiring Populations talk. Our speaker today is Dr. Ellen Hjort, who is a postdoctoral research associate at Aberystwyth University. Ellen's currently working on the Local Policy and Innovation Partnership for Rural Wales. She's also just completed her PhD in human geography, so congratulations, Ellen, on that recent achievement. And the PhD focused on rural spatial justice in two case studies, Åsele in northern Sweden and Llanidloes in Mid Wales, investigating how sense of belonging and political influence affect future visions and political disengagement. So Ellen's a qualitative researcher with experience of interviews, immersive fieldwork, ethnography, focus groups, and photo diary interviews. She's passionate about issues of spatial justice, particularly in relation to rurality, and her research interests include belonging, inclusion, citizenship, skills, race, whiteness, representation, identity, and migration. So today's talk, the happy object of rural community and the longing for youth, is a work in progress, emerging from Ellen's PhD work, and she welcomes any feedback you have. So Ellen will speak for about 35 or 40 minutes, and we'll have the rest of the hour for questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Ellen.
Thank you. And I'm just going to share, I think this is what worked on my previous meeting. So can you all see the slide now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you for that introduction, Reese. So my name is Ellen Hjort, and this is very much work in progress, and I've been combating with the structure of this, but I think I'm going to start with the case studies, introducing the two case studies and the methods, and then kind of trying to intertwine first some literature on rural community and belonging, and then talking about population decline and population development and how people are talking about that in the case studies, and then returning for the promise of happiness. So now they are switched, but returning for the promise of happiness and the kind of theory of that by Sara Ahmed, and then talking about how building community and is sort of juxtaposed with this existential threat that people are experiencing in these two case studies, and then I will conclude. So there are two case studies for this work. There were also the case studies in my PhD, and one of them is the municipality of Åsele in northern Sweden, and the other one is Llanidloes in Mid Wales. So Åsele is a municipality in the region of Västerbotten. It's located, as you can see, in the right-hand corner of the map, sort of in the middle of northern Sweden. It is the fifth smallest municipality in Sweden, with only 2,694 inhabitants in 2024. And with data from 2022, 32% of the residents were aged 65 plus. So that's quite a big proportion. And in Sweden, municipalities are responsible for most things that affect a person's everyday life. And to do this, they raise income tax. So most of the taxes that people pay on their income will go directly to the municipality, that will then use it for schools, care for the elderly, waste management, libraries, built environment planning, and more. Some of the things are voluntary, and many of the things are also statutory. And in addition to that, there is a tax equalization system, because the municipalities in Sweden are quite different from each other. So some municipalities like Åsele are very small, but also have a very large area. Others are smaller by area, but bigger by size. The biggest municipality is Stockholm municipality, that has almost 1 million people. So that's a good reference. So there is a tax equalization system where municipalities get some compensation for this. And some of that is based on, for example, the age groups of the people that are living in the municipality. So one thing, when I was doing my research in Åsele, what had recently happened was that unfortunately a few people of a particular older age group had passed away. And then that resulted in significantly less money through the tax equalization system for their local budget. And the area here is quite important to notice. So it's 4,277 kilometers squared. So it's quite large, very sparsely populated compared to the Welsh context, which is rural in a Welsh context. But this area is only 398 kilometers squared, and there is almost double the amount of population. 8,794 people lived in this area in 2021, and 29% of those were aged 65 and over. This area is the catchment area of Llanidloes High School, and I've excluded some parts of the catchment area that are part of what previously was the county of Radnorshire, because this area is part of the former county of Montgomeryshire within Powys, and that was quite important for residents. And also people would go to this school from the town of Newtown, that is the biggest town in Powys, that is just east of Llanidloes. But this was quite clearly among participants a sort of cultural area where people felt like they had a relationship with other parts of the area. It covers 8 town and community councils. And town and community councils, they were mostly responsible for things like buildings that they owned, commenting but not deciding on planning applications, and also organizing various types of activities in their communities. And then there are the county councils, which are responsible for quite similar things as the municipalities. But the council tax is based on housing and not on income, really. So those are the cases. And I used qualitative methods. I used interviews in both cases, and then photo diaries in Llanidloes and a focus group in Åsele. And then I did ethnography. So in Llanidloes, I traveled there consistently between Aberystwyth and Llanidloes, and then I would go back and forth over a period of 3 to 4 months. In Åsele, I spent a month living in the area as well, and I participated in different types of events. So in Llanidloes, there were 25 participants, 21 participants in Åsele, and then it was fairly even spreads of age, though slightly older, which reflects the population dynamics in the areas, and then length of residence, and with gender, there was slightly more women, but not notably. But all participants in this study were white. So that's quite important to notice, and it's not a representative of these areas. There are also no participants in Åsele that were Sami, despite Åsele being located in Sápmi, which is the area of the indigenous Sami people. There were some people that had European national identities, but there were no people that had national identities from outside of Europe. And there was also quite a small proportion of these people that had European national identity in comparison to what the structure is overall in these places. But then in terms of the literature, I want to start with imaginations of rural communities. So rural communities, especially in the UK, but in other parts of Europe as well, but in slightly different ways, are often portrayed as these kind of rural idyls, where there's an imagination of calm, peace, nature, and beauty. And these are not only observations from the outside, but also sometimes normative ideas of what a place should be like, and contain a particular ideology of tight-knit caring communities, but also sometimes of discriminatory, unequal ideas, so heteronormativity, gender roles, and whiteness can be included in this. But another important aspect is that rural communities are often portrayed as if they are under threat, and these threats can have different causes. It can be threats from urbanization and urban sprawl. It can be from population decline, but it can also be from the breaking of these ideas of a specific rural way of life, of a specific tradition. So for some people, they perceive it as threatened by, for example, diversity or crime or any of these kind of representation of things that are not represented within the idea of the rural idyll, but which always exist in these spaces regardless. And belonging can be quite a useful way of looking at a place and community, because in some ways it can be similar to identity. Yuval Davis argues that it has 3 elements: the social location of a person, their identity and their background, their identifications and emotional attachments to things and to people, and also their ethical and political values. But it is a future-oriented concept about what we want to be a part of. So there is a tension constantly between longing and belonging, where partly looking at wanting to be part of something or wanting not to be part of something, but also producing that sense of belonging continuously. But then belonging is usually just naturalized and only becomes political when it is questioned. But the politics of belonging is where the boundaries of political groups are established, negotiated, and contested. So when we're talking about these particular case studies, I think it's quite important to think about demography and population development to some extent. So Åsele has been experiencing population decline largely since the 70s, but at the moment it's mostly something to do with the fewer births than deaths, rather than the net migration is just -3 last year, while Llanidloes is an area that has had a pretty stable population, but that is sometimes slightly increasing because they do attract a lot of migration, especially maybe lifestyle migration, retirement migration. But across Europe, there are aging populations where people are living for a longer period of time, and sometimes also kind of low birth rates and stuff like that. But there is sometimes an expected desire for population growth, and that it would be good if people are moving somewhere if there are continuously more population, and that it is an imagine tragic thing if population is decreasing. And there are even these conspiracy theories kind of coming out about population development and specifically population decline, connecting to ideas like the Great Replacement theory and things like that. So it can be a very emotive topic, and it's quite on the agenda at the moment. But when you are looking at a specific place, then there are differences in terms of the dynamics of how things are happening. So rural areas like Åsele in Sweden are often depicted in ways that are talking of them as if they were actively shrinking, that loads of people are just leaving and moving away. But that's not really what's going on if you're looking at the figures. It might be more a case of legacy shrinking, where in the past there might have been active shrinking, a lot of people might have moved somewhere else. But currently, it's just that the demographics mean that if there are more older people, then the amount of people that are in an age where they have children, for example, is just not as many. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no children either. There are children, but the proportion of the population is a bit smaller than it could have been in the past. But there is often an economic argument that is made about these population dynamics, and I think it's quite well expressed in terms of what is very common as an argument in Sweden and by these participants. So this politician said, "We educate and we pay if we say the children that are born in Åsele need a good childcare, a good quality of school and college education. They don't get that on the home ground, but that is Lycksele or Vilhelmina or Strömsund, and they get to choose freely. We think it's good that you can give them that opportunity. And so they go to college in Umeå or somewhere else. And if you're then continuing to higher education, it's not so easy. And some actually come back after, if you're lucky, after a few years and that. We usually joke then we send them to Stockholm and they are fully trained, then they don't cost anything. Then they have it directly into production, if you put it like that. And then when they have worked their time to retirement, then they move home to the home area. And then then we get to take care of when they become old and give them a good healthcare and all that. So that isn't so easy to change. So this narrative here from the politician contains an idea of a kind of deal between society and the citizen, of the state providing for you when you are young and investing in you, and then when you are growing older through the life course and you're working, you are paying to help to be part of the society and to work to provide for the others in that society. And then when you retire, then society will provide for you again. Of course, that's not how it happens for all the different people, but it's an imagination. And then there's a critique here of how the decentralized system of taxing specifically affects these places that may be experiencing almost a form of circular migration, return migration at different points, are not necessarily experiencing that. But then there is another aspect of, if people are living away for their working life, that might be the time, if they have children, that they do, and then those children might not be connected to in the same with the same kind of place attachment to a place like Åsele, if that is their parents' home place but not theirs. But then there is also a level of resentment of having paid for these younger people that then are trained and educated as almost free labor for places like Umeå and places like Stockholm. I think I should also make clear that these other places that are listed, they are places where the people can go to college, because college is not available in Åsele municipality. And I used to think that this argument made some sense, but then I realized that actually it is also used where responsibility for these costs are not necessarily absorbed locally, because these costs are to some extent absorbed locally. But to complicate this, of course, pensioners in Sweden, they do pay taxes, they do pay income tax. They often earn a bit less because pensions are a bit smaller, but they do pay taxes. They also contribute through the tax equalization system. The municipality does get money depending on people in those older age groups, and that can contribute significantly to their budget. So we can question this perspective, but also in Llanidloes, sometimes these types of arguments about the need for there to be younger people and the less of a need, or sometimes even a disregard of older people, was present. And Llanidloes was more of a cultural region, even as it was, and doesn't really have the responsibility for what happens in powers at large. But if we're looking at how people spoke about the older people in Llanidloes, David said there is a vision of the future where it just becomes a retirement area, and it's already going like that way a little bit, where our services get constantly degraded as well. So first of all, there is a question here of who the place is for. So David is a younger person, and if this place becomes a retirement area, is that then a place for him? But there is also some kind of connection here that if it became an area where retired people live, then that would mean that the services could or should get degraded, even though those people are equally citizens of the society that we're living in. And this idea of the kind of devaluation, even though that might not be David's intention as such, of older or retired people, continues in other quotes. So for example, Martin said, I mean, retired people don't always do much for the community. You need to contribute something by doing something voluntarily, don't you? I think that COVID has made a difference. I think it's made a lot more people more isolated, and I think people haven't got back into the community thing as well after COVID as it was before. And to some extent here, the discussion is about how COVID has affected the voluntary contribution, but there is also the sense that older people don't necessarily do things, and that they should, that there is almost an obligation to contribute voluntarily. If you're not contributing by working, then you have to be doing something else. And we do know that elderly people are often contributing in terms of volunteering, especially in rural areas. But the expectation to do these extra activities can be questioned. Is it a level of disregard for what elderly people bring to the community? So now I wanted to get into the promise of happiness. So Sara Ahmed published this book where she talks about happiness as a future state that we're kind of trying to go to, perhaps as an end point. that all people universally are assumed to want, and for it to be kind of a wish, a will, or a want. And happiness is not only something that people want individually, but can be a responsibility people have to each other. And to reach this point of happiness, we orient towards particular objects that are a means to lead us there. And these objects, they are not material objects, but rather immaterial concepts or institutions like family or marriage, as she uses examples. But when we expect an object to make us happy, or an institution, this provides an emotional setting for disappointment, where if we orient ourselves towards family, for example, and then we're not experiencing that happiness that we expected, then that can lead to disappointment. And it is possible to live with such disappointment when you're constantly orientating yourself towards something, and it's not giving the payoff that you're expecting. This can be quite difficult to manage, but one way to manage it and keep up hope in happiness for the future is to defer the promise of happiness for those who follow. And this becomes both a sacrifice that you make of your potential to maybe invest in orientating yourself towards something else, a different object, and it is a gift to these people who follow, which can be your children, or it can be people that live in a place after you, or other people that in some way come after. But then there is a higher expectation on them to also be made happy by this gift and this sacrifice that you have made. So a quote here from the book is, "The science of happiness hence redescribes what is already evaluated as being good as good. If we have a duty to promote what causes happiness, then happiness itself becomes a duty." So she talks here about how there is often a focus on asking people what makes them happy, and how that sort of contributes to reproducing norms about what we expect to be making people happy in society, such as family or marriage, as examples. So if we're already saying that marriage is good, then there is a lot of pressure on people to consider that as good. And if they say that that makes them happy, and then we have to promote that, then that is a position of reproducing those norms. But when we orient towards particular objects, we are then expected to be happy. And Sara Ahmed, she goes on to explore examples such as feminist killjoys and unhappy queers, where the refusal to be made happy by conventionally understood happy objects is to disregard and disrupt the patterns of happiness among others, since their happiness may depend on yours, but also on the assumption that the objects that they are working hard to orient themselves towards are indeed happy. If we are saying that, well, this is not a happy object anymore, and people have invested a lot of time and effort into orienting themselves towards that, then that is shattering in some ways that image of the opportunity, of the hope, of the happiness. And this anxiety of kind of removing the happiness is constantly present, and it can contribute to obscuring the conflicts. Oh, that didn't work out. To obscuring the conflicts and the lack of happiness that certain norms and harmful structures in society contribute to. And I think in regards to this, there are two connections that I would like to make to happy objects and what we're talking about. So first of all, I think that the rural community could be understood as one of these happy objects. And this exists in a discursive environment, being quite a clear concept and an idea. And it also is, when I'm interviewing people, something that they often bring up to talk about as what is the good thing about living in this community. People are taking care of each other. I'm being looked out for by others. And people are working hard to reproduce this as well, participating in things, maintaining stuff. And even in some sort of counter-urbanization moves, you could argue now there are multiple reasons for people to move, but if some of the reasons are that people wanted to try living in a smaller community, try and know people a bit more, get involved, then those are the kind of things of moving towards this happy object. And then you have a vested interest in producing and reproducing that idea of that happy object as you are moving forward, because those objects, you have invested so much in moving and being close to them, in orienting yourselves towards them, that if it doesn't work out, then that's not necessarily a positive thing. However, there are counter narratives as well. In Sweden, there is a particularly notable narrative of urban norm, for example, where cities have been understood as the places that hold the promise of the future, opportunity and potential happiness, careers, education. And this is specifically often associated with young people, where it is sometimes even assumed that young people have to move away from their rural areas in order to find opportunities and move forward. So for some people, the promise of happiness might not lie in rural community. It might lie in something else, in somewhere else, in even orienting away from these rural spaces, if not the community. So people put in a lot of effort into orienting themselves towards this happy object of the community and building this community at the same time. And this can be partly a pathway that people use to establish belonging in a place that they move to. It's very common in the study that immigrants move to the area and then they get involved in loads of things to be able to feel like they belong, but also perhaps to be part of this idea of the rural community. But Angharad said the following: the infrastructure is hugely, in my opinion, it's hugely important. In areas like here, the infrastructure is the people. They're the ones that make the community go round. So the services are secondary. So you can get away with being very conservative here and not spending a penny because people kind of do it for themselves. So there is a bit of a double bind in this kind of quote, because partly there is the idea that there won't be necessarily as much investment. We won't get the people that are spending things within this area because people just sort it out themselves. But there is also an element of pride in that, an element of building that community, of saying, well, this community is existing, this self-sufficient community where people know how to do things and where they are working together. So volunteering provides additional services, and in rural areas is quite a common thing, and sometimes governments even rely on this, which risks producing inequalities where people in different situations in life have differential capabilities of volunteering, for example. But the intergenerational aspects can often be quite important for people in terms of this community building as well. So in this example from Åsele, Christine said, we want to have community. Everyone should be part of it. It doesn't matter if I'm 0.5 months or if I'm 98. We all pull together and help each other out. So here it's quite clear that the community, the rural community that you want to orient yourselves towards, is something that you're also producing while you're doing that. And to produce this, you have to be quite intentional. And you have to start orienting people towards this at an early stage. Even the youngest people will be socialized into being part of this community. And for Christine, things are, as an individual, things were going very well. She was very happy. She felt like she had probably achieved that level of happiness with her place, with her community, with the things that they had been able to put together. But for many participants, like for Angharad, but also for these participants, there are some things that make this more difficult. The existential threat of service decline in these areas. So Alice from Åsele said, I am worried that there's more and more that will be dismantled so that you can't live here, that there's just things disappear more and more. You notice it, like the bank disappeared in Åsele and Dorothea, for example. Will it then disappear in Vilhelmina soon too, maybe? It's like small steps, and you notice that what's scary is that it's so easy to dismantle things, but it's much harder to build something up again. So in this quote, there are two things that I want to point out. So first of all is that the word that is being used is not that the banks are being closed or removed or any other kind of word that would imply that a person is actively doing something and that it is a planned activity. Instead, the word disappear is used, which kind of connotates that there is a sudden, unexpected event that takes place, and that isn't necessarily actively done by a particular individual. And this was also something that a lot of people use this kind of language in my previous work on young adults in northern Sweden. And this is also coupled with the sense that there are small steps. One thing will go if something as service is removed, then they will never come back. And also if one service is removed, then that opens up for other services to continuously be removed into a sort of slippery slope to the point where you can't live in the place. So this creates this sense of existential threat. If one service is closed, then that could mean that the whole place is actually doomed in a sense. Like, that is the logic that is built up, and it's probably not what people would argue if they were really thinking about it. But these ideas, they weigh very heavily onto people on a regular basis, and it means that you need to constantly be vigilant about whether something might be about to disappear, to make sure that that doesn't happen, so that you can maintain and reproduce your community and your place and your life. And Jess from Llanidloes said, I wasn't sure if I could go to sixth form because they were talking about closing the sixth form. So when I was in year 11, that was a big thing. And a lot of the friends I was with in year 11 actually went to Shrewsbury sixth form because they thought, you know, if it's all up in the air, you don't know what's going to happen. So that was a bit scary. It's still up in the air for the other classes. So this threat of closure to the school, it wasn't actually closed, but just the idea that it might be closed led people to pick a different school. And this kind of strengthens the argument and the worries that people have about service decline, because people are worried that if services decline to a certain point, they won't be able to continue living there. They would have to move, and also that other people would be discouraged from moving in, and that would mean that you wouldn't be able to build something up. And if just the mere threat of and the insecurity actually makes people want to not participate in that, or not be there anymore, not be part of that school, for example, switch to something else, maybe move somewhere else, then that creates a bigger risk. And also in this case, that wasn't the case, but if it had been that the school was under risk of closure due to being small, then obviously it would have become even smaller if people picked something else due to that insecurity. So many people in this research were constantly living with this background stress of worrying about whether their place would have a future. And when I then asked people about what their hopes were for the future, many people said that what makes them feel hopeful is the children. And I would argue that the children are symbolic of a deferred promise of happiness, because if people are living with a constant stress of service decline, then that is not bringing you happiness at that moment. There might be pockets of happiness, but this constant stress also wears people down in continuation. But the children then can represent that there will be those who follow. If we win the fight today, they can live a nice life tomorrow. And Rachel from Llanidloes, this interview wasn't recorded, so that's why it's formulated like that, said that she hoped that the children, and not necessarily her children, but some children in the town, would grow up with positive values and then become future custodians of the area. There would be somebody to take over when she was older, when she and her family had become older, then they would be able to stay there and be taken care of. There would be businesses and there would be things that would be provided by this young generation that would take over afterwards. And that can kind of embody the deferred promise of happiness and the importance of the reproduction of place when people are putting so much effort into producing the place and the idea of that place in the first place. So in conclusion, this living with a constant existential threat, it takes a toll on people. It can be very stressful. And this is stronger in Åsele than it is in Llanidloes, but it exists to some extent in both. And it can sometimes necessitate that people defer the promise of happiness, that they feel like, well, I'm putting in all this work, and some of it, there is an empowerment in being able for us to do things ourselves, for us to be self-sufficient. But the stress of it doesn't really make up for the stress of it. But then children are being seen as symbols of the future, that they can take over, that there will be something. And while, for example, an elderly immigrant might be as old as me, or perhaps even older, and then they are maybe not going to be there by the time that I die. But this, I think, has contributed to the reproduction of ageist conceptions of elderly people as kind of passive, as costing money, because the focus is constantly turned towards this idea of the future rather than the idea of the present and what the values of individual people. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, Ellen. That was a really interesting discussion there. So we've got some 20 minutes for questions. So feel free to put up your hand, or you can use the chat if needed instead. We can read that out, but hands up is better. Who wants to ask the first question? Kate.
Thank you, Ellen. That was so interesting. I really like the way that you theorise this using Sara Ahmed's work, and I think that's my question really was related to that and thinking about the concept of orientation and happiness. And I suppose, like, as you were talking, I was just writing notes thinking that there is that you kind of characterize that really well, that kind of story of the fact that we're oriented towards and away from particular objects or feelings or affects. And so what we see as happiness is then contingent on that orientation. So if you grow up in a rural area and you grow up in a particularly kind of heteronormative community space, then your certain ideal of a future happiness might be based in those kind of things. But you also talked about how people disorientate that and subvert the idea of what happiness is. So I suppose I kind of maybe it's a comment more than a question, but a reflection on how happiness is a dynamic thing, and obviously with internal and external factors that kind of disorient what happiness is in rural communities, like things like the kind of disinvestment in services, crime or violence, and whether that happens on an individual or a collective level in particular places, and how people cope with that both individually within their, and demography is really relevant here, and so is intersectionality. So thinking about class position, age, which you talked about age a lot, and gender, and how people cope with those kind of the disinvestment and the erasure of the place that they grow up in or that they want to settle in. So I'm kind of like waffling on that, sorry. But I suppose it's thinking about this concept of orientation and the fact that everybody is orientated in different ways, whether or not you're part of a rural community. So I suppose saying a bit more about the kind of structural inequalities within the community and how that shapes perceptions of happiness, and when if there's enough diversity in what the promise of happiness is, does that then kind of devalue or undermine a collective sense of what rural happiness is? And then I suppose linking to that is the idea of temporality. So this idea of the promise. Is it the promise of happiness, which could be actually quite a fleeting thing, a day-to-day thing based on small scale kind of presence in a particular successful situation or something like that? Or is this actually the promise of a happy ending, and where people are ending up back in the rural at retirement age? And there's all sorts of kind of life course questions then that happen, and that idea that the future is for our children, so it is, we hope our children will have a happy ending, you know. So I suppose there's that thing about temporality as well, if you could say a bit more about that. Sorry, that they're quite complicated questions, but thanks very much, it was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I'll give it a try. I'm going to start with this idea of temporality. So I think that what Sarah was talking about in the book is the temporality is more of the kind of happy ending idea rather than the fleeting experiences of like those kind of good feelings at a certain point. So I think that was kind of the aim that I'm looking for. But I also think that the promise of happiness, because it is so future oriented, is constantly not really living in the present. And I think that was a thing that is a bit difficult in terms of dealing with the empirics, because people are often, they are happy about some things and they are not happy about other things, like if you put it like that. So then the temporality of it is a bit challenging. But when you are thinking about the future, I think that I guess it's about having this this hope. I think that a lot of people want to experience this hope that the future will be positive, that you will be able to have a good life, that you will reach your goals, that there will be a positive outcome. And I think that is something that some participants, when they think about their daily life, they are very happy. But when they think about where the future is going, they are very concerned. And I think that is, I guess, the tension that I'm trying to talk about a bit in this study. But then again, then the question is that the important thing to go for? Because this promise of happiness is not the promise of a reality that is really obtainable. It is these kind of ideas that we have framed in society as like the goods that we want to achieve. But in reality, it couldn't be fulfilled, because a utopia is not a destination that you could actually get to. So it's not really an achievable goal, but rather a promise that you're chasing that is not fulfillable. Yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer, but then the other question was about how the diversity of different people and what they are looking for out of their life and their goals. And I think that is an interesting point, because there are in the data, there are certainly many people that are content with where they're at, and that includes particularly people that, for example, moved to Llanidloes, are very happy with the stuff that they have there. The amount of services and the things that they see, and the development, and where the town is going in general, very happy with that. People that have lived there for a longer time are more likely to reflect on things that they feel like there is a decline in certain elements, or community, or local identity, or it might even be in services. In Åsele, that might be a bit more related to age, where some of the younger people, they're looking at the place and they are quite happy to be there at the moment, but they are also not always certain that they are going to be there continuously. It's a thing for now, but they might move somewhere else in the future. But overall, I don't think that there was no people in the Åsele case study that felt like it would be okay to get rid of more services, for example. That was quite clear. I think in Llanidloes, there potentially was some people that maybe wouldn't be too upset about that sort of thing, in terms of they were already feeling like they had bought into living far away from things. But in Åsele, people really felt like it was kind of life or death for their community. And I think that they were quite united in that. But then there were different ways of addressing these issues. So that's another aspect. And especially in relation to, I think immigrants to Åsele were much more likely to have an outlook of, well, we can resolve this. We can be proud of this place. We can market it. People will want to come here. But the people that had lived there for a really long time, they were more pessimistic about other people wanting to come there, I suppose. Thank you.
Jackie.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you whether you interviewed any people whose children had gone away and or had come back again. I've worked, I'm not an academic, I've worked on the edges of all of these fields all of my working life, and I've brought up 3 children in the village that we've lived in since we got married. And I think when you were talking about some of the influences on people, there is this huge tension between young people feeling constrained by the small place they're living in, but actually that small place giving them an enormous amount of confidence because they're treated as individuals. They're well known amongst other families. They have very strong friendship groups. And I think it gives people the confidence to go away, and then it's very, very hard to come back, even if they want to do that. And I suppose you haven't really talked about the constraints on people being able to move back, specifically on the cost of housing, which is probably a little bit less in Llanidloes than it would be if they were nearer to some of the big population centres. But it's a huge issue for people.
Yes, I didn't really talk to people about their children's migration, but I did talk to people that had moved back themselves, and to somebody whose grandchild had moved back. But yeah, I would like to say, first of all, like in Llanidloes, that is a big concern that people have about housing and the cost of housing for local people. And many people, even when they're moving back, they're in their kind of 30s and 40s and even 50s, are really struggling to be able to afford a home in the Llanidloes area. So that is very, very difficult. In Åsele, that is not a problem at all. In Åsele, the houses are very, very cheap, to the point that people are rather struggling in the other way. When they feel like they want to move somewhere else, they cannot sell their house and have enough to buy a house in a different location. So some people get stuck in Åsele in that sort of way, by kind of being locked in the money. But there is this aspect of people feeling quite very, very proud of their places. And I also heard people talking about this particular idea of the confidence that people gain from their rural places, but also the social control. I think in Åsele, people were very open about, it's a very lovely place, everybody knows everybody's nice, but it's also very difficult because people know what you're doing, they know your business all the time. And it is an even smaller community. In Llanidloes, that was also the case, that people were talking about, well, there is not really a place for me to go out with my friends without the older people always knowing, or without my parents finding out what I've been up to. So some people also left because of this, and then kind of came back because they felt like they needed to try out their own, try their own wings, basically, in a different context. And then they were able to come back when it wasn't as important to just be independent of their family. But yeah, many people who came back, they were struggling. They were also struggling to find employment that paid enough money to be able to buy those new houses that they wanted to get. And part of the drivers in that can be like the retirement migration potentially from different parts of England, where people have earned quite a lot of money. They have the money for a big deposit, and then they can pay into that, while those who are looking to find a job that will pay for those kind of houses and mortgages later on are struggling.
Thank you.
Katrina?
Hiya. Thanks, Ellen. That was really, really interesting. I just had a couple of kind of reflections and related question. I think it's really interesting, this idea that there's an image of population, of people leaving, which is causing population decline, even if it's not accurate, which you were talking about in the Swedish case study. And then I think it's interesting in your Welsh case study that you're coming up with this kind of ageism and quite negative, attitudes towards older people. And I wondered if that was really about negative attitudes towards people moving into the area who are retirement migrants. So is it more about migration than it is about, or as much about migration as it is about age? And yeah, to what extent are is the perception of existential threat to do with the idea of the threat of migration, whether it's the threat of young people leaving or other people coming in? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that there might be, I'm not sure about this, whether there are negative attitudes to migration overall. There was a very positive kind of discussion that people had about younger people coming in. So in Llanidloes, people said, well, after COVID, we've seen loads of families actually, so that's really nice. And in my village now, we used to just be old people, but now we are some younger people as well and stuff like that. So I think that there is an openness to younger people. There was also, I mean, even when I was interviewing people, there was somebody in the Llanidloes case study that was like, we need like people like yourself to come in. So I think that, but there is also with that, there is also a class aspect. I think that there is a desirable migrant that is maybe kind of younger, middle class, educated, that they're wanting, kind of regardless of what the job availabilities are and the contributions that any kind of population increase could make. But then I think this is very sorry. I think that was very interesting how you put it about the existential threat being the threat of migration, because in many ways this position of the worries about population loss and about not getting the proper investments, not getting the proper services, are really connected to the sense that the area can't really do much to control the migration. Like, you can't get the people to move there because it's not attractive enough, or you don't feel even maybe sometimes that it's attractive enough, or you can't keep the right people in, or you can't, and it's just out of their control as well. So I think that might be that is a good idea, a good way of putting it.
Time for one more quick question, if anybody's got a burning question for Ellen. No, if I can just ask, just to follow on, Ellen, just from Katrina's question, how does nationality, particularly sort of anxiety, is it also an anxiety about people from England in particular moving in to rural Wales? Does that intersect with age specifically?
Yes. I think that's the simple answer, because actually it was very easy for people that were from other parts of Wales to move to Llanidloes and feel at home there, and those, because they could just kind of connect to their national identity, and then they were like, well, obviously I don't know all the people yet, but I'm part of this community, and they didn't feel like they were closed off from being a part of it, because there were people that had lived in the area for like 40 years that were still not be able to say, like, they kind of felt Welsh, but they weren't able to say, well, I'm Welsh, and they often felt like they had to say things like, well, my great grandparents were from Wales actually when they were at work and things like that, but obviously they had lived there for the vast majority of their lives at that point. So nationality did play a big role in who was allowed to belong in the Welsh case study, and also these particular, the retirement migrants are often from England as well, so that plays a big role. But I think that they weren't, this position didn't seem to be as negative. It was like families with children from England, because Llanidloes is not too far off the border, so there is like kind of connection to Shropshire and stuff like that as well. Yeah, so that is an important point, and very relevant in the Welsh case study.
Great. Thanks very much, Ellen. So if we can just again show our appreciation once again to Ellen, and to thank everyone for your really sort of insightful and thought-provoking questions. Thanks very much. Just as a reminder, we have another session